Alright guys, I'm back with another video. Sorry I haven't uploaded in a couple days, been busy out of just about a full week of work besides the holidays. Um, but yeah, I'm excited to get back to you guys with the video that I'm going to be going over today, and I'm going to be talking about my pound for pound predictions for 2025. This is also going to second as like what I think is like the proper pound for pound rankings. I'm only going to be covering the top 10. I'm not going to cover all 15 different spots just because I didn't feel like it. Plus, if I covered all 15, I'd probably be including fighters that you guys don't really care to hear about all that much. So I decided to really only go for the top 10 fighters. But yeah, let's just get right into it. So the first fighter that I'm going to be covering at the number 10 spot is going to be the fan favorite Alexander Volkanovski. Now, he's currently ranked 11, but I think he's going to come back and fight this year, and I think he's going to win his fight, whomever it may be. I honestly think he's going to challenge Diego Lopez for the belt, depending on how things go. But we really got to see how things play out. Really not too sure, just because we're not certain if Topuria is actually moving up a weight class or not. But we think for sure that he is, or I think for sure that he is. But yeah, I think first I'll have to concede that Volk is sadly past his prime. But regardless, I think he's one of the best fighters in the featherweight division. Even though he's definitely he's probably going to be lacking the performance that he's had in the past. I think with some time off, he's really been able to regain a lot of confidence, and hopefully it translates to his performance in the octagon next time he fights. Yeah, like I already said, I think he's on the downhill leg of his career, and unless he gets a winning rematch against Topuria, I really feel like he's always just gonna feel like a placeholder in the featherweight division. Sadly, like I don't think he's ever gonna be quite the fighter that he once was, just because he had such a staggering defeat against Topuria, and that's really all there is to it. It was acceptable for him to lose to Islam just because that's not his weight division. He was moving up to fight a bigger guy, and he still contested him in the first fight at least. But with the defeat that he suffered from Topuria, I just think that it really shattered the perception that people had of him as pretty near indestructible, if you ask me. But yeah, regardless, he's still an awesome fighter. I really like the guy. I'm sad to admit that he is definitely moving into the later phase of his career, but hey, he's still a crafty vet, as we would call him. But yeah, moving on to the next guy, the number 9 spot. I decided to put Marab here, actually. A lot of people might not like that because people just generally don't find Marab to be that awesome of a champion or that awesome of a fighter. But I definitely think that a lot of people just overlook his skill. Right now he's ranked number 7. I think he's going to drop in the rankings to number 9 just because I think he will end up losing to Umar. But I think he's going to have another fight this year, and he's going to be able to prove that he's still a top contender. But yeah, like I said, I think he dominates everybody in bantamweight besides Umar. His striking really needs improvement, and we saw a lot of holes in his game, especially when he was fighting O'Malley. Because even though O'Malley was not fighting like he regularly does, because he had that huge threat of takedown from a Rob, he was still getting outclassed on the feet by O'Malley, and O'Malley wasn't even fighting like he usually does. He looked pretty awkward in the ring when he was fighting at 306. So he definitely needs a lot of improvement in that regard, but he definitely makes up for it with the grappling pressure. I mean, that's how he won the championship in the first place. He was just able to take advantage of his strengths enough to give him openings over his opponent. Regardless, unless he shows a serious amount of development with striking this year, I have a hard time seeing him moving up any higher on the list. But yeah, I mean, I think the guy's pretty cool still. I think he's a really solid fighter, and who knows? Maybe he has a really promising future. Maybe he suffers the defeat to Umar, but he comes back at another point in the future and really shows us that he's got more to demonstrate for us, more of a show to put on. Moving on to the number 8 spot, we're going to talk about Mr. Bones Jones. Now, I think this one may really ruffle some feathers, just because right now he's at the number 2 spot. He's a fan favorite. A lot of people love him. I don't, but I know a lot of people do. But let's just be realistic. Jones's career is already seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. We know that. He's flirted with retirement multiple times. And I feel like, to a certain extent, once fighters start actively talking about and thinking about retirement, that's probably a sign that they're not quite in the same form that they were when they were younger. But yeah, he's still shown that he's really dangerous, even though he was fighting Stipe, and Stipe really looked like a fish out of water in that fight. He was still showing us a lot of skill. He still put him down eventually. I think he put him down a lot slower than his younger counterpart would have, or any of the other fighters that are ranked above him on this list. I don't think it was that stellar of a performance, just considering how great the discrepancy was between Stipe now and Stipe how he looked 4 years ago when he was still really contesting the top fighters in his division. He's still got the crafty vet status, enough to remain relevant on the pound for pound list, but I think it's pretty inevitable that the newer generation of fighters are just faster, hungrier for the competition, and just stronger in the cage in general. And, I'll be demonstrating that with all these other younger fighters on the list as we go on. But yeah, I think he's at the number 8 spot. Still think we should still give him credit where it's due, but he is an old man. He's kind of moving into the old. He's already in the old man phase of his career. Next guy I wanted to talk about was Shavkat. So Shavkat's currently unranked, but I think that will quickly change, especially because I think he's going to beat Bilal whenever they fight. I think he's going to be at the number 7 spot. So, Shavkat's the guy who I genuinely expect to rule the welterweight division in 2025 and probably into 2026 as well. There's a lot of really strong contenders in the welterweight division, but I think this guy is just young enough, he's got the drive, and he's just skilled enough to really dominate for the next year or so. He's obviously incredibly dangerous on the feet. He's shown us that in multiple of his fights, and I think he's the most efficient clinch work fighter on this list as of right now from what I've seen. I think he's just got crazy skill with the elbows and the combos and the clinch. He's really good at holding his opponents on the fence. And that's not even really getting into his submission threat. He's just a crazy good fighter. He hasn't shown that much takedown skill, but he's shown a lot of takedown defense, and he's shown us that he doesn't really need to be a super crazy takedown offensive fighter in order for him to really dominate his opponents. A lot of people try to make the argument that Ian Gary fraud checked him in their fight, but I would remind those people to remember that Shavkat is still in the earlier phase of his career, and he's definitely not in his prime yet. And secondly, he fought Gary with the torn MCL, and he still won the fight pretty decisively, if you ask me. Ian Gary did fight well, I know. But I still think Shavkat obviously won. I don't think it was like an incredibly dominating performance, but I think it was decisive enough for it to be a unanimous decision. And he did all of that on a torn MCL. Obviously, it was torn enough for him to. It wasn't torn enough for him to not fight. But any injury is gonna be a significant disadvantage for a fighter, and yet he still won the fight. But yeah, he's generally just like a super skilled fighter. I think he's got a lot of potential, and I think he's going to continue making a huge splash in the welterweight division into the new year. The next guy on the list that I wanted to talk about was Mr. English guy, Tom Aspinall. I think this guy is actually one of my favorite fighters as of right now. He's just a beast. I mean, in the time that it took Jones to finish a can like Stipe, and yes, I know Stipe was an absolute monster earlier in his career, but I'm talking about 2024 Stipe, firefighter Stipe, who was ready to retire but just got back in the ring because he wanted a paycheck Stipe. That's what I'm talking about. In the time that it took Jones to finish Stipe, who looks like a can, I'm pretty sure Tom Aspinall was able to finish 4 fighters in that same time frame. That's absolutely staggering, right? I think he's inevitably going to win the fight against Jones if it happens. Dana's, I feel like, has really been over-promising on this fight happening just because Jones has been so anal about being compliant with the fight that he's supposed to fight, considering that there's an interim champ, and he's still really neglectful of that fact and of that duty, honestly, that he should be fulfilling. But yeah, regardless, back to Tom. He's so dangerously fast for a heavyweight, and he looks incredibly crisp, both with the striking and with his takedown in submission. It's actually incredible. He's got really heavy hands too. Like I already said, his speed is just unreal. Whether it's level changes or takedowns, position switches, stance switches, individual strikes, and obviously his submissions, like I already said, he can do it all. He really can do it all, and he's like a big guy. I don't know how he moves like like he does, but he just looks so natural, slipping into dominant positions on the ground. He's so good at finding holes in his opponent's striking defense. He honestly, he looks like Islam or Khamzat, if you ask me. But I must admit that it's kind of hard to tell if he looks that good due to the heavyweight skill discrepancy, or if Tom really is that guy. And honestly, I'm inclined to believe that it's just because the heavyweight division, like I was saying in my last video, is really not that competitive. But regardless, he still shows a demonstrably huge amount of potential and just skill in general. I think he'd be higher on the list if it weren't for the absolute battlegrounds we call the lower weight divisions. But if he dropped a weight class and he still dominated there, I think I'd definitely put him higher up on the list. But yeah, as of right now, number 6 is where we're going to put this man. Yeah. Next up on the list, I'm going to be talking about Umar Nurmagomedov. I really like this guy. I think he's super cool. I think he's a great fighter. But I mean, I really don't have that much to say about him. In all actuality, he's got a pretty similar style to Khabib. He honestly looks like a hybrid of Khabib and Merab. But he's got much faster and much more adept striking than Umar does, and I think his scrambling is a lot better too. He's really good at making it out on top in grappling exchanges, and specifically grappling exchanges that are being defended well by his opponent. I mean, he did that a lot against Corey Sandhagen. There was a lot of scrambling in that fight, and he still managed to come out on top for the most part. He's just as fast as all the other contenders in bantamweight. But he's just got incredible takedown threat that puts him above a lot of the other guys, especially O'Malley and Yan. As for the pound for pound ranking specifically, though, I think it's really hard to deny how well he compares to the other top fighters, and I think as his career, as his fight catalog grows, I think the public perception of him and his fighting reputation is just going to exponentially grow. I think that's pretty inevitable. I'm really excited to see what this guy does, and I think he's going to stay in the upper half of the top of the pound for pound list for honestly the foreseeable future. I have a hard time seeing him getting cut out of it for the next couple years at least. But yeah, next guy is a man that we're all very familiar with, and he's made quite the splash in his division, and honestly in the UFC as a whole. It's Mr. Khamzat. This guy is just absolutely insane. He's currently unranked. I don't know if I mentioned it for the previous fighters, but Umar was unranked too. I put him at number 5. Khamzat, for some reason, God knows why, is still unranked even after his performance against Whitaker. Honestly, I think it's because when it comes to the pound-for-pound rankings, they don't consider you for it unless you are a title holder or you were in the past. That's why, for some reason, grappling fish like Sean Strickland are on the list, but a guy like Khamzat isn't even sniffing it for whatever reason. But yeah, I don't need to say too much about this guy. He's incredibly fast. He's so explosive. I think explosive is the best way to describe him as a fighter. And I don't think any of his opponents that he's fought, except for Gilbert Burns and Usman, have shown any sign of being able to successfully defend his takedowns in any considerable way. His striking's pretty adept for the most part. He's not the greatest striker, but he hits really freaking hard, and it's good enough. It's good enough to keep his opponents on his toes, and especially good enough to suppress most advances that his opponents are going to take. I think his one significant drawback is that he seems to really gas out in the early rounds. That is a significant problem that I think he's really got to develop, just more so for the sake of the longevity of his career. Because, I mean, if you ask me, if he were to get back in the ring with Usman, that's honestly, I think that might happen. He might challenge for the belt after Khamzat wins. And I think what's going to happen is if Usman has a full camp, he's really going to struggle to put down a guy like that unless he's able to develop his later round cardio in the near future. He's got that crazy speed, but if he's not able to pull off an early round win, his fighting pace really tends to slow down. But regardless, he's just so dominant in that first round, like I've already said, that it's not as significant of a drawback as a lot of people may consider it. Moving on to the number 3 spot, this is a very interesting one for me, and that is Alexander Pantoja. He's currently ranked at number 9, but I think he's really going to move up. This guy is just phenomenal. I can't believe I was sleeping on him for as long as I did. I knew that he was always a decent fighter, a very considerable fighter, but it wasn't until I watched this fight with Kaya Sakura, and then I went back and watched a few more of his championship defenses when I realized that this guy is the real deal. I think he is one of the top strikers and grapplers of the UFC as of right now. I think he's actually on his way to GOAT status, if you ask me. He's just a great guy. I'm really hoping this is a good year for flyweight, just because he is such an amazing fighter. But on the bright side, he has been gaining a lot more recognition and has demonstrated multiple times that he's capable of just about everything in the cage. He's really good at applying pressure against his opponents. His striking's amazing for being, and especially for being such a dangerous grappler. His striking is so dangerous, and because obviously a lot of fighters are pretty lopsided. I think this is the most well-rounded fighter in the UFC. Doesn't mean he's the best grappler or the best striker, but I think he is perfectly in the He's just a perfect culmination and very equal when it comes to both striking and grappling. I'm really hoping he can get another serious title defense at flyweight. I would love to see that. And then possibly go up to bantamweight and get that double champ status. Sadly, I don't think he'd be moving up to bantamweight this year just because he already fought in December, which means I don't think he's going to fight probably until late spring or early summer, midsummer, something like that, and I have a hard time seeing him squeezing in another fight in the following 6 months of the year. But regardless, I think one more title defense is going to be enough to really bump him up the list, just because he's already on that path to GOAT status. And as of right now, the only guy that I could see being a threat to him would be Umar, and that's only considering that the possibility of Alexander moving up to the bantamweight division to fight for the for double what's it called for two champ division status, right? But yeah, I mean, I think that fight between him and Umar would be a mythical fight. I'd really be looking forward to that one. This guy's an awesome fighter. He can really do it all. He's just a beast. But yeah, I'm gonna move on to the number 2 spot, and I think everybody was already expecting this, but it's Ilya. This guy is just a monster. This picture's so cold. He's so cold. He's so cold. But anyways, this guy's just an absolute monster, and I think what scares me the most about this monster as a fighter is that we know he's more than capable of mixing up his offense, shooting a takedown, establishing a dominant position, and then going for a submission. We've seen it do him multiple times in the past in other fights that he's had in the UFC. And we know that this is well within his skill range. But even though he's really good at grappling, for some odd reason, he has strictly opted to go for striking offense in the past 3 fights that he's had. It's absolutely crazy. And he's just been washing these absolutely stacked fighters. Like, just a bit of an aside, I know a lot of people would give a guy like gave Pereira the fighter of the year, and I think that's so true just because of what he did specifically for the UFC as far as numbers and as far as taking fights short notice. But even though he did have 3 wins and Ilya only had 2, I think it's undeniable that Pereira was fighting a lot of cans. But Ilya wasn't just fighting cans. He fought Max and Volk. These aren't just some regular dudes who just like to slug out in the gym and happen to make it into the rankings like it is in light heavyweight. These guys are both top 20 of all-time fighters, and notoriously for their striking, both of these guys. And they both got slept by Ilya in their primes. I really think that Ilya is the only one on this list in serious consideration for the number 1 or the number 2 spot, obviously besides number 1 spot on this list. And the only reason I didn't put him there is just because he's so new to the GOAT scene, the GOAT conversation. I think he needs a little bit more decoration before he can be solidified at the number 1 spot. But he is incredibly close. That is undeniable. I think it is undeniable how skillful this guy is, how dominant he is, how amazing of a fighter that he's shown. And that's really only the striking that we've seen from him. Imagine if he goes up against a Makhachev and he really starts to get into his grappling bag. It's really going to change the game. But man, this guy is just an absolute killer. And I think that by 2026 he might take that number one spot. I think it's a very, very, very real possibility. But we got to see how it goes, don't we? Anyways, moving on to the number one spot. I don't think anybody saw. I don't think anybody saw this as a surprise. I think most people probably saw this coming. It's Islam Makhachev. He's already been at the number one spot for over a year now, and he's still showing that he's just dangerous in every aspect of his fighting game. He outstruck 3 world-class strikers who were at least two of them were former title holders. Actually, they all 3 were, now that I think about it, because I mean, DP had the interim champion belt. But yeah, I mean, he completely outclassed Oliveira to win the title. That was absolutely insane. He made him look like a fool on the feet, and then he submitted him in, like 45 seconds, something like that. Something in that realm. And then, although he had a much more contested fight against Volkanovski, he still won the fight. And Volkanovski is a GOAT, and he was the title holder of featherweight at the time. And then in their second fight, he just slept him in the first round, which is absolutely insane. And then he outstruck Dustin as well, and then he eventually submitted Dustin. But yeah, I think he's just so far ahead of the curve with his wrestling, and his striking is so well developed that even though he's not like the greatest striker, he's still good enough to put crazy numbers up on some of the greatest strikers that we've ever seen. But yeah, I think he's good enough to challenge anybody else in consideration for the top pound for pound fighters, and he's obviously just got better accolades with 3 title defenses. He's got the knockout power, the striking precision, the fight IQ, and then the very, very incredibly real serious takedown and submission threat that he's demonstrated so many different times in the ring. This guy is just insane. This guy is just like a great... I really think that Ilya and Islam super fight needs to happen. I really need to see that in my lifetime, and if I don't, I'm gonna have to find a way to cope. I don't know how I'm gonna do it, but I'm gonna have to find a way to cope with the reality that they might not fight. The very real possibility that they never fight. But yeah, all these things I've already listed in combination. I think it just makes it demonstrably obvious that this guy belongs at the number 1 or at least number 2 spot. But I decided to put him at number 1 just because he's got a little bit more. He's got a little bit more of an establishment as like an amazing fighter, and he's been around for a while too. Right now, he's got the number 3 spot of like the most consecutive days being at the number 1 pound for pound spot, and I think that honestly says enough. But yeah, that's just about everything I had to talk to you guys about today. I really appreciate y'all tapping in and checking out what I had to talk to you guys about. But yeah, sorry it took me a bit to get back to uploading a video. I really wanted to, but like I was telling y'all, I was working for the week, and then obviously with the holidays and New Year's Eve, it was easy to get caught up in everything that was going on. But yeah, next video coming soon. I'm already working on another script. I've already outlined it for the most part, and I'm going to be working on it as soon as possible. I live in Texas, and we got a freeze coming soon, so there's a possibility that I might have a couple openings this weekend. Maybe I can upload 3 times this week if possible. We just got to see how it goes. But yeah, I appreciate y'all for tapping in. Go ahead and leave a comment. Let me know what you think of the video. I really want to know what you guys think. Leave a like if you're gracious enough, and subscribe as well. Thank you so much for tapping in today, guys. Have a good night.